I hope this is working. Hello, everyone. Let me see if any of you are joining me yet. So this is my very first live stream, and I'm a little bit nervous about the technology. Hopefully this is working. I have my tech support guy, aka my husband, on standby here just in case it goes wrong. All right. I think we are now live. Oh, well. Welcome everyone, those of you who are joining me now. This is my very first live stream. I'm a little bit nervous about this, but hopefully it will all go well, and I have my tech support guy, aka my husband, on standby, just in case something goes wrong. All right. I'm opening up the floor for your questions. I don't really have any teaching component planned for today, so just let me know what your questions are. If I can actually figure out how to find you guys. Oh, I don't see any comments. Oh, hello, Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Nice of you to join me. And we've got Mark and Bunny Bee. I like that. I love bunnies. And Emmanuel and Everfelt. Oh, I'm so happy to see you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, the floor is open, so if you guys have any questions or comments, and I'm just here to answer. Oh, when's the book coming out? That's a really good one. That's a good question. It's about a third, almost half of the chapters actually have been professionally edited at this point, but since I started the YouTube channel and I've really been pouring so much of my energy and time into that, I've really been having a hard time returning to writing and getting all those chapters finished, but I desperately want to get back to returning to that. So I was just repetitive there. So, all right. So hopefully that answers your question. I know I don't have a deadline there or a time frame really. If I get back to working on it really soon, I'm hoping maybe spring of next year. It's just taking me so long. There's just so many distractions in my life and so many things just kind of taking away from that writing time. Let's see. What's the difference between whistle notes and just screaming? All right, so whistle notes are actually produced with a damped vocal fold. So the vocal folds, only the thinnest edges are well, in the highest part of head register, we get this damping effect where less and less of the vocal fold is involved in vibration. And with whistle tones, we actually mostly just get a little bit of a gap through which the air is actually creating that whistle sound, as opposed to, I'm sorry, what were you saying? You're saying head voice? Or screaming, I'm sorry, then just screaming. All the questions are just kind of zooming past here. Yeah, so screaming, on the other hand, I mean, that's a good question, really, because if we're talking about the same phonation frequency range, the same pitch range, there's really not much of a difference. I like to think that screaming in general is more of, it involves more vocal fold vibration, involves a little bit more of the vocal folds in that vibration. That's how I would take it. I don't really imagine that most of us are screaming in those high pitches for females in that 6th octave, for example. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Oh, you weren't prepared for this. I feel like I wasn't prepared for this either, Rachel. I'm like so nervous because it's like I just don't trust technology, but it seems to be working, so that's good. Let's see, Sarah. How would you approach teaching a 14, 15-year-old boy who has an alto range? I'm assuming that his voice hasn't changed yet. That's really tricky. I think in that case, I would focus on the fundamentals of good, healthy vocal technique. You're probably going to encounter issues with vocal registration as the voice starts to change. His instrument's going to continue growing over the next several years, physiologically, up until about 21 for a lot of boys. And so even if he's experienced the voice change but still sings rather high, there is going to be likely a slight lowering of his range as that instrument continues to develop and grow. It may be dramatic, that shift, that change. So it may end up being that he is just a higher voiced male, but I wouldn't at this point be anxious to classify his voice. It's way too early for that. But I would just really focus on the fundamentals of healthy breath support, good breath management. That is applicable to all singers at any age, and that's something you can definitely handle. I would also focus on things like vowel definition, making sure that his vowels well for the pitches that he's singing, regardless of the register that he's in. And then, yeah, just help him through those healthy things, making sure that he's not straining and squeezing as he moves higher in pitch. Making sure also that you continue to develop the lower parts of his range, because even if he is higher voiced, we don't want to neglect that lower part of the range. It's really important that he continues to develop his full range, and then that will hopefully help him move into adulthood with a much healthier instrument and a good basis for technique. Hopefully that helps. Let's see, where you need to be when singing. Oh, tongue, where it needs to be when we sing, and lips, can you show me? Okay, Emmanuel, I'm assuming that you're just talking about sort of correct tongue posture when we're singing. In general, we want the tip of the tongue to be behind the lower front teeth. We don't want to be pushing it up against those lower front teeth, because that's just not, it's going to create tensions, especially at the back of the tongue as we're using those muscles to push that tongue forward. And then we just want kind of a natural hump of the tongue. We want to make sure that the tongue is sort of broader. We all have different shaped tongues, so some tongues are going to be fatter and wider than other tongues. But if we're narrowing that tongue, that's usually a sign that we're actually narrowing and tensing all the way down to the base or the root of the tongue. We want to really be mindful of that. It should just be a very relaxed tongue. And for most vowels, we want the tongue tip behind those lower front teeth without pushing it in there. If you have a shorter tongue, you may find that that's a little bit uncomfortable for certain phonemes or certain vowels, like E, for example, that has a high tongue posture. Keeping the tongue tip forward for somebody with a really short tongue might be a little bit uncomfortable. But generally speaking, I'm an advocate for trying to maintain articulatory principles that we have during speech. When we speak, our tongues just know how to form those sounds. We know how to shape our instruments effectively for making the different speech sounds. So it's really not much different for singing. There are exceptions. As we sing louder and as we go higher in pitch, the jaw starts to lower, but that tongue really needs to continue to speak the integrity of the vowel, as Richard Miller often said. Hope that helps. And let's see, hello, Todayus, I'm assuming it's Todayus. Bunny Bee, do you have any tips for deeper, richer tone like Mariah Carey? That's a good question. It's so funny because I'm actually in the process of editing a video for you guys. I'm hopefully going to post it tomorrow. And it has a number of clips from my singing from about 17 to 14 years ago. And one of the things that I often did, especially because I was kind of singing in sort of rock style, was I like to over darken my timbre, and my vowels would fall really far back and everything sounded like this. Not operatic at all, but it's just very dark, and I just thought, oh, well, that's going to make me sound a little bit more like a rock singer, and it's going to give me that depth in my sound. And what ended up happening was I also lost the ring in my voice. I have a naturally darker timbre. I don't tend to have a lot of brightness and ring and brassiness to my voice. But you have to just be careful in cases like this, because you don't want to falsify your timbre. You want to make sure that you still have, even when you're adding depth to the sound, that you're also maintaining a degree of ring in your tone. You want to make sure that you have the full body of the vowels, the brights, the highs, as well as the lows and the darks in terms of the overtones that we're using. So in that case, usually when we're trying to get richer tones, we want to kind of just make sure that we stabilize the larynx a little bit lower in our vocal tracts so that we have more space for those lower formants to resonate and those lower overtones to resonate. But again, it can come at a cost if we're sort of doing that in a way that falsifies our timbre. We want to make sure that we're not also losing the highs. I think that's really important. Somebody like Christina Aguilera, she tends to do those growls kind of sounds and the tongue tends to fall back a little bit. And some people really like that sound and others not so much. They prefer to have that darkness in the sound, that backness. And, you know, just from somebody who was very self-conscious about the backness in my voice, just the natural backness, but also what I added to it. Um, yeah, I've just learned not to really love that sound as much. I start to like a little bit more of the ringing, bright kind of qualities. And if you listen to a really good singer, you listen to somebody like Kelly Clarkson's a really good example of somebody who has that depth in her sound, even when she's belting up in the fifth octave. She's got a lot of depth and power in her sound. She doesn't go thin and bright and shrill as she sings up in that high range. She maintains that depth. And she does that in different ways. I think she covers her tone a little bit. I think that she actually lets the vowel turn over, which is something I don't really want to delve too deeply in today. But I feel like I'm going all over the place. It's very, very odd talking to my screen here and such. But so, um, yeah, I think stabilizing the larynx, creating more space, that's going to give you some richness in your tone, but just don't do that by sacrificing the ring, that ringing quality in your voice, because it will just create a really dull, lackluster kind of tone. So find that balance there. And you can do it by retracting the tongue root or the tongue a little bit and flattening it. But I don't really think that's the best option because it also has an effect on the flexibility of the larynx, and we don't really want to go there probably. You write well. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, I lost you guys. Okay. Stephen, thank you. Jean. Oh, hello, Jean. Nice to see you. I see you a lot on, I think, Facebook. Is it on Facebook or just here on YouTube? It says, good afternoon. Adding twang or brightness to a voice. My voice tends to get darker as the night wears on. Ah, this is very, very timely here, your question. So because I'm somebody who has a really back voice naturally, I've had to consciously add twang. And as I start to get tired, my voice starts to fall more and more back, and I start to also drop a little bit in pitch. And so I'm very conscious about that in my speech as I get tired, as I get later in the day, to make sure that I don't drop my speaking pitch, and I keep adding a little bit of that twang even in my speech. And it just keeps things operating really efficiently and feels really good and healthy. And I think just making it a habit of keeping the feeling, we're not placing the voice, I know you can't really place the voice, but just that feeling of the voice sort of being more here, that resonant voice and that almost forward hum space, right there, that's where we want to speak, in that space right there, and not kind of speaking back here, because if we start to speak back here, it sounds really dull, and it'll probably tire our instruments a little bit more readily. So yeah, for me, you may be in a situation too where you just have to consciously make sure that you're in that good space where there's a lot of ring in your voice, even at the end of the day. Please help. I have a swallow reflex and a high larynx. Okay, that's I know I've recorded some videos on this topic on the low larynx. Not that we always have to sing with a low larynx, but we don't want to have this highly activated swallow reflex, because that definitely will create that feeling of tightness and tension in our throat. So we don't want to have that constriction, that feeling of constriction or tightness when we're singing. I haven't really heard you sing, so I have no idea exactly what's going on. I'm assuming you're talking about higher up in the range, which is typically where that swallow reflex comes in. And if that's the case, I would just gradually ease my way into singing higher notes. I wouldn't go and just sing high notes with a high larynx, because when you're doing that, you're just reinforcing that same habit, and you're creating more deeply entrenched habits, more deeply entrenched neural pathways and muscle memory. And so what you want to do is you want to gradually learn to be able to coax that larynx lower. And sometimes we just do that by, I've talked about that sort of yawn sigh. Not really thinking about singing per se, right? Just feeling that release inside there. There are so many different ways that we can really do that. Even if you're able to do like lip rolls, can't do it with the lipstick on very well. Like, I can't do it. All right, so if you can do like lip rolls, usually there's a little bit of in behind them, sort of that neutral, almost, I always describe it as like someone sort of punched you in the gut. That neutral posture inside the throat. Just that's what you want to achieve ultimately, without again sacrificing the highs in your tones, like the higher overtones. So you want to make sure that you're doing this gradually. I think if you try to sort of force the larynx down, what you're going to tend to do that in some sort of unhealthy manner, especially by flattening or retracting that tongue and pushing it down, trying to shove it down with that tongue root. We want to make sure that we're not doing that. We want to keep that tongue, the root of the tongue forward, leaning up against the front wall of the throat, and we want to keep that tongue just a nice comfortably curved posture that's appropriate for the vowel, right? Every vowel has its own tongue shape. The E is a little more fronted and higher, the ah is a little more back and a little lower, and all the other vowels kind of fall somewhere in between those two extremes. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to think of a good approach besides just sort of, I love just practicing inhaling. I've had students do this where they go for a walk, just practicing the inhale. And what that does is it just teaches the soft palate to go up and the pharyngeal walls to dilate and the larynx to just kind of go down on its own. I don't know if your larynx is high during speech. Some individuals have, high larynges when they're speaking, and that's a habit that again is deeply entrenched. And now you have to figure out a way to slowly, gradually, safely, methodically, and strategically coax that larynx lower. I always go back to that inhale posture. That's really all you need. And learning to be able to not change things drastically when you're moving into phonation, when you're speaking or singing. Oh, you know what else I love too is the whispered awe, the Alexander technique whispered awe. You can find some demonstrations of it here on YouTube. And Ron Murdoch has a demonstration, but there's a woman whose name I can never remember, but she has a really fabulous demonstration of this. And it's just, you're basically getting into this little bit of a lift here, that inhale posture. You're almost singing, it's a whispered ah, so you're saying ah, but you hear that little bit of a rush of air. And then what I do is I gradually bring those vocal folds together and I start to phonate from that same posture. Hopefully that will help. Let me know how you do with that, and you can always message me and I'll be happy to try to answer your questions for you. Let's see. Big tonsils cause any difficulty in singing? Jose. I've talked to a few people who complain about the same thing, and they feel as though it seems to affect the ring in their voice. Physiologically, I doubt it's getting in your way. If there's a swelling in there, if they're big because of inflammation, that might be a little bit more difficult, because then you've got edema, then you've got this situation where they're not able to move so that you can sort of expand that whole palatal area. But as far as it interfering significantly with the actual mechanism of singing or speech, it shouldn't be a problem. I would just be mostly focused on resonance. If the tonsils are really big and they're kind of just sort of trapping that resonance in behind them, that might be something that you might need to look into and consider. I'm not a big fan of surgery; it's sort of a last resort. But if it seems to be problematic, I would talk to your doctor and talk about the possibility of surgical procedure to remove them. Typically, we don't remove tonsils anymore, from what I understand, unless there are real serious issues. But yeah, I'm not a medical expert, but as far as singing, I think really the resonance is the only thing that might be affected by it. You were great at holding still. Oh, I feel like I'm kind of like nervous. I have so many nervous gestures. I'm like rubbing my hands and wringing them. But thank you so much, Mark. No, it hasn't shifted yet. Oh, you're talking about the 14, 15-year-old? Yeah, so just be patient with that, because what you'll find is like sometimes it happens almost overnight with guys, and then it's like they're starting from scratch. A lot of guys feel like they're just starting from scratch when it comes to the voice change, and they become toddlers again. And it's a matter of patience. And again, I think if you're just teaching really solid, healthy principles, that will carry that student through that voice change. There will be challenges, there will be issues. I think they're unavoidable, But a lot of the issues that I find with students that we're working with who are pre-voice change and then post-voice change is that they want to sing songs in the original keys or the songs that they've always been singing them in. And then they run into issues because now it's kind of really proportionally speaking in a different part of their range. And I worked with a student who was actively performing, extremely talented kid, really good guitarist and a good singer and a good songwriter. And he was 14 at the time, and he had just experienced his voice change. In the previous maybe 6 months, he'd really been struggling. So his mom contacted me, and she had him do some lessons with me. And the biggest thing was that he kept trying to sing all of his songs in this tenor range, even though his voice had kind of dropped to sort of a higher baritone. And sometimes just lowering the keys of a song until that voice really figures itself out is a good approach. Yeah, I think the squeeze is big. I think the squeeze at that age too, because the larynx again is just kind of new. They don't know what to do with it. Let's see. Emmanuel, sorry, I'm sorry, I don't remember your question, Emmanuel, what you were asking earlier here. The tongue, lips, where they need to be. Okay. On Papa Rock, same thing. I mean, going back to speech articulation principles, that's really the healthiest way of using our instruments. If we try to manipulate things excessively, we run into all sorts of issues. We do sometimes, we lower our jaws more again, especially for higher pitch and louder singing. That's really normal. But that doesn't mean that we have to do anything really, really weird with our lips or mouths when we're singing. Just going back to those speech principles are the most important thing. How did you learn to supply the appropriate amounts of breath pressure for specific notes? Hi, I never know. It's Ria? Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your question here. It's a good question because I think for most of it, it's kind of intuitive. It's something that we have to figure out on our own. There are certain things that a teacher can help you with, really spotting some of the faulty mechanics, some of the things that we're doing with our breath management strategy that are counterproductive. As for me, the big thrusting the abdominal wall forward and thrusting it back in to initiate the tone, that to me is just a huge red flag because that just raises subglottal pressure so high. And then when you watch that, what you usually hear, when you observe that in a student, you usually hear that there's a lot of squeezing and pressing going on here to try to keep the glottis, closed, to keep the vocal folds together against that high pressure. And so when we hear things really imbalanced like that, we need to take a look at the breath, I think, first. Are we squeezing that abdominal girdle too much and forcing that air? And in that case, we kind of have to lower that a little bit and just think in terms of, I always just keep a little bit of expansion here in my lower ribs at all times. And then the squeezing comes from down below, and keeping these lower ribs somewhat expanded helps to just kind of pace that outgoing air and sort of mitigate those subglottal pressures. But how much air we supply in terms of the appropriate amounts also depends on what's going on up here and how much vocal effort we have. So for me, I was a very light singer and I kind of tended to lack vocal effort or sufficient vocal effort. I could sing without an airy tone, but I tended to bridge into head voice or M2 very, very early. And so I was using appropriate amounts of air pressure and air flow based on how I was coordinating here. So the levels are going to differ. So the more compression we have here, right, at the glottal level, the more we bring those vocal folds together, the more firmly we bring them together, the more air pressure we're going to have to generate in order to get those vocal folds vibrating. And then the less compression we have here, the less pressure we're going to have down here, and the more airflow we're going to have. And honestly, I think it's a matter of experimentation. I think it's a matter of really starting to become very kinesthetically aware and paying attention to what your body's telling you. For me, when I first started increasing my vocal effort and trying to extend my M1, my chest voice range, I had a real imbalance. I was pressing too much in here to try to hold on to that. And then there was so much breath pressure and not enough air moving through because I was pressing too much that I felt like I was just stacking up air pressure, breath pressure, and things were not moving. And so I found, over time I was able to kind of sort of ease off a little bit on this compression and this pressure that I was putting up here. And that helped me to find that balance. But it took some work. It took some trying to figure out, and well, how much can I ease off and still stay in M1 without it flipping or breaking or going airy? How much can I ease off? How much can I compress at this level without feeling that sense of pressure rising too much and feeling like we're almost choking because there's not enough air moving? And we just need to really pay attention to our bodies and listen to what our voices are telling us. Does it sound squeezed? Does it sound pressed? Does it sound, when you hear that at the end of a phrase, I hear that with some students who are just really pressing so hard here that there's almost like this little cough at the end and almost like a grunt. And when you hear that, that's a sign that the pressures are too high and there's not enough air moving. But when you get that flow phonation, when everything feels really balanced, what you're going to feel is everything just, it feels good, it sounds healthy, and you don't get that feeling of breath pressure stacking up, even if you're using higher breath pressure, which sometimes you need in certain singing situations for certain techniques. You need higher breath pressure. But again, that breath pressure needs to be matched with appropriate airflow, and that appropriate airflow comes from the degree of compression that we're using at the glottal level. Sorry, I'm fumbling over my words and I'm really dry. I hope that answered your question. How I learned it, yeah, I think a lot of it was just intuitive for me until I actively started trying to change things about my technique, in particular trying to increase my vocal effort and try to extend my M1 range so that I could learn to mix and belt a lot more effectively. Linda, from what I understand, this is like the middle of the night for you, but thank you so much for joining me. I'm assuming you're in your pajamas at this time. Greetings from Tasmania. Oh no, it's 8:10 in the morning. Okay, so I thought it would be like the middle of the night for you, but welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Mark, I can hit a shaky B4 to C5. Not a pleasant sound. Will I eventually, with practice, be able to sing those notes well? I'm a tenor. Absolutely, absolutely. Tenors, this is your fun range. Not fun in the sense that it's not work for you, because you have to work. You have to work to be able to build that range and to sing those notes, especially with any degree of intensity. But absolutely, up to a C5. My baritone students, I have a lot of baritone students, and I expect that they'll be able to sing a C5, all of them, regardless of how, the fact that they're baritones automatically does not make it so that they're never going to be able to sing that C5. That's actually my expectation in training, is that even a baritone, that C5 will be a usable note for that singer. So absolutely for a tenor, I don't know if you sing in classical styles, if you sing in contemporary styles, but you listen to, a lot of classical singing, and there are B's and there are C's in there, those high B's and C's, and they're sung by tenors and they're sung well. It's absolutely possible with the right kind of training. It's a bit shaky, and that could be a matter of breath. It could be a matter of too much or too little vocal effort, especially when you try to find that balance between what's going on here and what's going on, with the breath and that airflow as well. Sometimes it's just shaky because the instrument just doesn't know what it's doing yet, and it's almost like going back to like a toddler, right, sort of wobbling as they're walking. Sometimes it's like that. So sometimes when I'm working on my upper range, especially more my chest mix range, right, and I'm trying to ease off a little bit so that I'm not having to necessarily sing everything really loudly to be in that M1 coordination up higher. I kind of play around with it a little bit. How much can I ease off in terms of the loudness before I get that shakiness? And then what happens is I'll ease off and I'll start to get a wobble or a shake. The coordination is right to some extent, but my instrument's just not quite 100% there. I don't know if that really answered your question or not, but um, eventually practice to be able to sing those notes well. Yeah. So again, you will, and it's a matter of practicing the right way. And again, I don't know what style you sing in, because how I would approach that with a classical singer would be a little bit different from how I'd approach it with a singer who sings in contemporary styles. But it's, yeah, be patient with yourself. And I would again grow this range very, very casually, very gradually, casually, no, very gradually. And I would just do it semitone by semitone by semitone. Don't just go straight into trying to sing those C5s if that octave for you, or near octave, is unstable. Because again, if it's unstable because things are imbalanced here, then you could potentially just be reinforcing that instability. And you want to make sure that you're finding balance on all those notes leading up to that range. And what you'll find is when you start to get the vowel right, and when you start to get the breath right, and you start to get that ring and that consistency in terms of how you're producing your sounds as you move through that passaggio area and above, what you'll find is that I can't talk today, that range will grow very, very gradually, but it will grow. It will grow consistently and steadily. I see this with a lot of my students, especially when I start introducing concepts like closed voice to them, as opposed to open kind of splatty yell coordination, that they initially aren't able to get very high in their range, but within weeks, that range starts to grow semitone by semitone by semitone. So it's a matter of patience, and it's a matter, I think, of being intelligent about how you're approaching that part of your range. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Thank you so much. Oh, Emmanuel, you're most welcome. Rachel, used to over darken. Yeah, it's a bad habit. I think honestly, and you'll see this in my video that I'm going to post tomorrow. I think a lot of it for me, I have a naturally darker timbre. And I have a little bit of a backness in my speech just naturally, and I've had to add twang to my voice over the years. So my voice used to be even a little bit more back than it is now. And I think because of the styles in which I was singing, I felt like my light girly voice, because I've always had kind of a sweet, pretty girly voice, I always kind of felt like it was somewhat incompatible with the styles in which I was singing. And I felt, well, if I'm going to sing rock, if I'm going to at least attempt to sing rock with the existing technique that I have, then I somehow need to darken it. And I felt almost like I was trying to compete with males, because let's face it, rock is dominated by male voices. And a lot of the singers whom I used to emulate were males, and male rock singers, baritones on top of that, and they tended to have some deeper kind of qualities in their voices, and male gospel singers who were like belting out these crazy notes, and they had that darker timbre to begin with. So I think that falsification of my timbre really kind of messed me up, and I think that it actually hindered me. It hindered my progress in moving forward, and those days are done for me. I'm just done with it. I'm trying to, over the years I've been working on trying to find my real voice, and that falsification of my timbre just wasn't working for me. Wasn't working. All right. Yay, I can't wait to see your new video. It's going to be so embarrassing. I'm kind of nervous about it because, oh, I lost you. Oh my goodness, so many questions. I'm really falling behind here. I talk too much. Okay. Yeah, Bunny B, that video I said I'm hoping for tomorrow. It should come out tomorrow night, probably tomorrow evening. And it's, yeah, there's going to be lots of samples. They're all original songs that I recorded many years ago. And I listen back now and I just cringe. And yeah, but the good news is, and I state this in the video too, is that I was playing these old recordings and my eldest child walked into the room and he did not recognize my voice. He's like, "Who's that?" I said, "It's me." He's like, "No, it's not. It's me." Which I think is a good thing, because all of those things about my voice that I think weren't working, I've improved upon, and that ultimately is the goal in training, is to really find a resonance and a tone that works effectively for you and effectively for the styles in which you're singing, for your own unique voice, and such. So articulatory, yes, I love that word, articulatory. Thanks, John. Jean, yes, the magical elusive ring. Yeah, Twang, honestly, Jean has been my lifesaver. I was never introduced to this concept of twang in my early training, and it's really been for me in more recent years that I started exploring this and finding like it's magical. It's the actual technique itself is just amazing because when we start to add that, all of a sudden now we're making sounds that just cut without us having to really significantly increase our muscular effort. And then, we can belt, we can sing higher notes with much more ease and much more power, again, without forcing. And I feel like for me, articulation, because my tone was so back just naturally, that, even diction, the intelligibility of my diction is just so much clearer. Sorry, my voice is cutting out. I'm going to go about 45 minutes. That was the plan today, was somewhere between a half hour and 45 minutes, but I'm finally starting to sort of relax a little bit. How would you go about singing full voice tenor male passaggio notes? For me, I would like to know how to get my F sharp 4 G for full voice. This is from Twister, to a B4 or C5 full voice. I guess it depends on how you define full voice. I think there are different definitions of that. If we're talking on open voiced singing, which is an M1 chest voice dominant sound all the way up, that is, it's naturally going to be full voiced, but we may not like the sound ever. As I've discovered in my own voice, I can carry my M1 up very, very high up into the, well up into the 5th octave, but I don't like the sound of it. So it's full voiced in the sense that it's loud and it's big, but I find it not to be very musical. And so what I've started doing with a lot of my students is training them in something called closed voice, voce chiusa, and teaching them to create more of a classical mixed voice, even though they sing in contemporary styles. And it's something that I'm applying. If you listen to really good singers, there, like again, I mentioned Kelly Clarkson earlier, and even the singer who sings the part of Moana, if you listen to her singing How Far I'll Go, when she's singing those high notes, even the belty notes, she's actually somewhat closing off, acoustically closing off those vowels. And open versus close is really, it's an acoustical phenomenon by my definition. It's really all about the relationship of the first formant to the second harmonic. And I don't want to get too much into detail about that. I don't want to bog you down with the science behind it. But I wish I could demonstrate, but I'm like so dry right now. But when you're doing, I've got to think of a good example of a song where I would close it off in that range. But it's the difference between going oh versus oh. My pitch is terrible. Oh versus oh. Hopefully that makes sense. The O is just kind of shouty, and we're kind of locking that first formant in with the second harmonic, and then the O, we've kind of allowed that second harmonic to rise above that first formant. Terrible demonstration, I'm sorry, so dry. But that's what I do with my students, and we have varying degrees of open versus closed as well. Again, it's all about that relationship between the first formant and the second harmonic, but we can continue to brighten that sound so that the vowels that we're singing are a little bit more speech-like. And that's kind of where I'm trying to find myself, is like I'm borderline open. I'm even on belting, which is what I'm learning to I'm trying to close my belt a little bit, because I don't like that loud, splatty, yelly sound. I worked for years trying to approach belting and like high, heavy chest mix from this open voice, this yell kind of coordination, which is what so many singing teachers teach us. And that's how I learned it, was, okay, you got to open, you got to just kind of, do this, and you've got to yell through that upper range. And I just found that I was physically capable of doing that, but for years I did the same thing, and I just never liked the sound. And that's when I said, I need to do something different. I need to approach this differently. And since I started learning to be able to close off those vowels, closing doesn't necessarily mean that the mouth is really small, by the way. Again, it's more of an acoustical thing in my book. Learning to be able to not splat and not go into that yell coordination but still maintaining that weight of M1. That has just opened things up so much for me. Like some of the sounds that I'm making, I'm so much happier with, and I feel they feel better. They feel really efficient, and I just like the control that I have dynamically as well. I can sing them louder, I can sing them quieter, still in M1 without having to sound like I'm, yelling all the time. I talk too much. I'm sorry. One ring to rule them all. John, thank you. Jose, let's see. What's the best exercise to elevate a soft palate? We do need to elevate the soft palate to some extent, but I'm not somebody who really focuses a lot on the soft palate, unless there's an issue, unless it's clear that there's an issue with the soft palate being low, especially if we hear a lot of nasality in the tone. Sometimes I will have some singers, every now and then I come across a singer who has a slightly lowered soft palate that seems to sort of almost trap the ring in the voice sort of behind it, and the voice just sort of sounds like they're singing into a pillow. It's sort of a little bit muffled. But in most cases, I leave it well enough alone. And just simply inhaling is really all that we need for the most part, assuming that we don't drastically change how we're shaping things once we begin to phonate, once we begin to sing. But I do some exercises like NGs. So you're using the NG where the tongue comes up and meets the lowered soft palate. But then once you sing the kind of neutral sound, the soft palate kind of springs up. And then using like the ga 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 kind of sounds, using G's, ga 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 ga, because again it's like the NG where the soft palate kind of touches, and the G, it's up higher, it's not a nasalized sound. But exercising those muscles. I actually have a student who's working on this really interesting software related to snoring, and it's fascinating because he shared a lot of the research with me, and he shared this program that's Singing for Snorers, and a lot of it's really based on developing tonicity of those kind of lazy muscles that cause the snoring, and that includes the soft palate. And a lot of the exercises that this woman uses in that program are involve like the NGs and those kinds of palatal sounds, the sounds in particular that involve the soft palate, and especially the tongue, and being able to develop strength, like the tonicity really, and the flexibility at the same time of the soft palate. I don't know if that's too much detail, but it might be something interesting to look into, is that Singing for Snorers is what it's called. There are lots of exercises on there, a ton of exercises. Some of them are really, really difficult, really fast paced, but yeah, NG, and then just simply inhaling. Those are good. Even just pinching your nose sometimes is enough to cue your body to lift that soft palate. You were doing fine. Breathe. Thank you, John. I have difficulties breathing. It's really terrible. I think a lot of it comes from our native accents. Absolutely, absolutely. And regionally too. Definitely regional accents, because familial and regional, definitely. There are some parts of the country here where there's sort of that forwardness and twangy nasality that's not always pleasant, and the vowels tend to be brighter. So I say ah, more like almost like an aw. My ahs are very back and dark, and other people say ah, and it's a little bit of a brighter sound. That's something I've had to learn to do, is my ahs, is improve those. You're the best voice teacher ever. Oh, thank you, buddy. That's really sweet. Rachel, Jean, I so agree. A lot of it comes from the native. Oh, okay. And I'm sorry I don't know how to pronounce your Nagical? Hi. Thank you so much for joining us. Twister64, when instructed to support near the passaggio, what should be happening physically within your throat and diaphragm? I always get kind of confused when asked to support. This is so funny. Yeah, this is funny because as much as I believe that breath management is fundamental, it's to good, healthy, effect, skillful singing. I don't talk a lot in terms of support. I'm really careful sometimes with the language that I'm using when it comes to supporting the tone, because it does tend to carry with it a lot of assumptions, or a lot of a lot of baggage, I think, for a lot of singers, and sort of experiences that they've had in the past with either teachers training or just trying to figure it out on their own. And so when you're talking about support, I think for me, when I'm working on that passaggio area, I always just tell singers to sort of keep things fairly steady. Instead of increasing, even though sometimes, yes, you do need to increase certain aspects of your singing as you move higher in the scale. I think one of the biggest problems that singers encounter with vocal registration problems and constriction and squeezing on those high notes is just that they're pushing too much from here because they believe that they have to increase their support drastically for those higher notes. And so when you're doing those exercises, those semi-occluded exercises, maintaining that little bit of expansion here, and just doing those, and as you're moving up higher in the scale, I'm so dry. So you're moving up higher in the scale. If you maintain a little bit of this, what you feel over time is you'll start to feel that everything just kind of evens out and settles, and you feel a sense of consistency in that subglottal pressure. And this responds here with some consistency in terms of that closure and compression. I think that so much of this is intuitive, and so much of this is trying to figure it out by paying attention to what your body is telling you. As much as I think that sometimes we need to address breath support directly. Sometimes I think that there are singers definitely who are struggling to figure out that coordination, and that poor coordination that they're applying to their singing is inhibiting things, and it's preventing them from being able to move forward in their training and accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. I'm always so cautious about instructing singers to support more or to support differently. But I listen. That's the big thing for me, is when I hear things starting to press or squeeze, I look at what's happening with the breath. Okay, are we pushing too much in here? Are we squeezing? Are we forcing? Because again, if we build the pressures too much, or we're squeezing too much here, this responds by squeezing. And so if we just kind of keep everything fairly steady, those exercises where you're not changing anything, I love humming exercises. NGs are excellent for the passaggio. Another thing is the French nasals. French nasal vowels are excellent. The those vowels, and even really crazy nasalizing those sounds, are probably going to really help you find that balance as you move through the passaggio. Hopefully that helps, but I would play with that. I have students who do. I'm working with one student in particular who's having great success with those French nasal vowels. He's using in particular, and let him keep it really nasalized, and even more so as he goes through the passaggio, because sometimes that nasal port opening can relieve a little bit of that pressure. And just keeping the sound very consistent and focusing on that consistency and not losing the ring in your voice, not losing that sense that the voice is all kind of emanating from the same place. That's going to really help you through that passaggio, because the big thing through that passaggio is that we try to change things. There are changes that happen, but sometimes we try too hard and we think too much about that section of the range. We overthink it. Sorry, that's great. Hello, Dan. We have Dr. Dan's Voice Essentials here, so it's so nice to see you. I'm really surprised that you joined me for this live stream. So yeah, it's great. If you haven't checked out Dr. Dan's channel, please do so. He's got an absolutely great channel, and he does a lot of live streams, so you can always ask him your questions as well. He's extremely knowledgeable and well educated in this topic. So John Prof. Twister, you can push down slightly in the diaphragm and try to feel the resonance moving upward out of the throat, more up into the hard and soft palates. I'm not sure what you mean by push down slightly on the diaphragm. Are you talking sort of thinking down and just, or are you expanding more here? Are you kind of pushing down in terms of like into the pelvic floor? I'm always a little bit leery of that as well, just because anything that kind of uses force like that can lead to problems up here. But yeah, I think those exercises that I've used for in my series on breath management, I used a lot of sort of those semi-occluded phonations, the lip rolls, tongue tip trills, those kinds of sounds, or the V's and Z's, Z's for those of you who are joining me in Canada and the UK and other countries that say Z. Um, those are great because again, what they do is they create that positive back pressure, which ends up stabilizing the pressures both above and below the vocal folds. Straw phonation, that will also help you through that area. And I think that will cue you to the right amount of breath pressure and the right amount of breath flow that you need. Yeah, I love semi-occlusion. It's so helpful. How do you find that the tone that is most natural to your physical makeup? I'm around a lot of John Legends and Lords these days. I know emulation is part of learning, but that's a really good one. That's a really good one, Mark. I honestly, I feel like I struggled for years to find my own voice. Again, as I talked about earlier, I think I falsified my voice because I was emulating voices that weren't anything like my own, and I had these expectations in my head that I was supposed to sound like this person or this person. Especially, I hear so many voices today that have these certain qualities that are very similar to so many other voices now. I feel like that's become like the in thing when it comes to voices. And I personally, I can't make my voice do the same things. I can't get those qualities in my own voice. And so it took me a long time, many years of failed emulation, really, to start to accept my voice for what it is and to find it. And once I started finding it, I started making a lot better choices in terms of the songs that I was singing and the sounds that I was making. And my voice is not like a terribly unique voice. As much as it'd be great to have something that's sounds like this person over here. It's just not who I am, and just in accepting that, I think has been liberating on so many levels for me. So I listen to my speech, and I try to base a lot of how I sing on speech. Obviously, there are adjustments that we make for song, but if we're feeling any sense or any need to darken, brighten, do anything drastically, especially lower the larynx and sound like an opera singer or whatever it might be, I think that puts us kind of in the danger zone, because that's when we're more likely to try to falsify our timbre. And so sometimes just going back to speech. So how do I sound when I'm speaking? And then just start to elongate that. I'm speaking. I'm speaking. I'm speaking. I'm speaking. That's my voice right there. Does it mean I can't change the colors and textures? No. Does it mean that I can't do different things with it? No. But that's kind of my base, my starting point. Because again, I had so many weird ideas in my head about what I was supposed to sound like. And I feel that pressure too. I'm probably like you, that you're surrounded by all these people who have voices that are kind of the in thing, and voices that are marketable, voices that are selling. And the temptation is to want to try to emulate that and to become to move ourselves a little bit more to that. And we just need to, I think, in the end, be true to our own voices and trust that that's enough. Trust that that authenticity is actually what's going to sell others on our voices, and really just that emotional connection that we have as well. Let's see. Twister 64. Any exercises you can recommend to improve chiaroscuro and improving the tenor ping? The stuff that I talked about earlier, just that hum, especially in the NGs and those French nasal sounds, are excellent for that. Depending on the style in which you sing, more twang, like the nya 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 nya, those kind of babies cry wah wah. Those are great. And the NGs, I love the hums, really. For me, I stick my tongue out a little bit, and that helps to coax the tongue root forward a little bit, gets it out of that pharyngeal space, and then it prevents me from wanting to over darken. Some of us have really bad hums. I remember when I first started taking lessons, my singing teacher hated how I hummed. It was very back, it was very pushed from in here. It didn't have that ring, so I had to learn to be able to create kind of a twangy ring or hum. Wah, wah. It's right here. And then if you carry that through the passaggio, you're not going to lose that ring in your voice. It's when you start to try to manipulate things too much, when you start to try to over darken, especially because, again, I have kind of a classical background. I never performed classical music, but I did have some classical training. And so, you know, the low larynx, right? Oh, oh, oh. And there was that, you want to, oh, and it just sounds so dark. And it just, you know, and if you listen to, you'll hear this in my video tomorrow, that there's some of that, definitely there's that covering in the voice and that backness that I thought I was supposed to have, that I thought I had to have a low larynx. I thought I had to have a wide open throat and everything to make the sounds that I thought I was supposed to be making, and the things you learn later in life. But yeah, so I think when finding your, that ring, you can't sacrifice the ring for trying to maintain stability of the larynx. That's the big thing. That's the big thing that I think we all need to learn. All right, I'm gonna have to end this pretty soon. My kids are stuck down in the basement. They're playing the Wii U, which I'm sure they're not complaining about whatsoever, but at some point they're going to want to come upstairs and have dinner. Let's see, Fatalistic Nation, interesting. When I sing at speech level, there is a buzzy overtone kind of thing happening that is definitely not pleasant. I also feel my top row of teeth and the tip of my nose vibrating a bit. Thoughts? Have you recorded yourself? Because that would be interesting. Because I think sometimes perceptually, sort of like what we feel or what we hear inside our own head, sometimes it sounds like an unpleasant sound, but it just may be something that you're not familiar with. And so maybe if you record yourself and play it back, it might give you more indications as to what's going on. Sometimes I hear in singers sort of like almost like a rattle. And that says to me that there's an imbalance somewhere along the voice system. I mean, I can't really tell without hearing you sing exactly where that's happening. It could be that you're forcing. I often hear sort of these weird buzzy overtones when we're forcing. It could be that your vowel is poorly defined for the pitch, and so there could be an incompatibility between the vowel and how you're shaping your supraglottal vocal tract with the pitch that you're singing, the harmonics that produces. And when there's that incompatibility, there's like this clashing that happens that can create a little bit of a rattle, and it can even make the vocal folds operate inefficiently. And so I can't really know for certain what it is, but look into that. Really, pay attention. Are you pushing too much? I think that's the big thing, pushing too much. Yeah, I don't know if it's if it's more in your nose. I know you said you feel like the front row of. See, when I sing, like when I'm singing sort of like in a high M1, but I'm keeping that twanginess, I definitely feel everything kind of here, sort of in that alveolar ridge area and the teeth. And, depending if I'm singing like a nasal phoneme, like an M, N, or NG, or a French nasal, I definitely feel like a sense of vibration in here. Yeah, I mean, it's all subjective really, but generally speaking, feeling things up here is not a bad thing. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. That buzz, that funky buzz that you're hearing, are you hearing it like in the upper range, or are you hearing it throughout the range? That's another question too. But oftentimes it's from pushing too much. Hey, how are you doing? Just got here. Oh, hi so much. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Fayumuchi? I don't know, but I've met you sort of indirectly. We've had lots of conversations. So thank you so much for joining me. Oh, you're in Bangladesh. Oh yeah, I should have asked you guys at the beginning. Should have taken my cue from Dr. Dan. He always asks everybody where they're watching from, because it would be really fascinating to see where some of you are from. I know some of you have stated that already, but I need to stop talking so much because we're at the hour mark and I haven't answered everybody's questions. I'm so sorry about that. I'm absolutely brand new at this, so I will get better. I will get more efficient at this over time. What's the difference between a choral tenor? I don't know what the half is, and a classical tenor. No difference really. They're the same voice type. It's just how they're going to shape their instruments is going to be a little bit different. Contemporary, choral tenor, depending on if they're singing, if it's a classical choral situation or contemporary. But oftentimes, I have a video on this. I interviewed someone about this, and we talked about the differences between, choral and solo singing. And with the choral singing, generally speaking, there's a little bit more space, a little bit closer to classical, but depending on what the choir director wants, it may sound more classical or less classical. And that really has to do with how you're shaping the vocal tract. So I can't really kind of give you sort of a blanket statement about that because it's going to differ, I think, from choir to choir, from choral director to choral director. But generally speaking, choirs tend to use closer to a classical setup. Usually the choir directors want, sort of those longer, more open vowels. They often like the head voice more so than, a really chesty belty kind of sound. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's really, I think, director dependent. How do you get rid of the supraglottal squeeze in low pitches in muscle tension dysphonia? My voice has gotten a lot better. Can hit B4, C5 with a clear sound and vibrato in M1. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that's great. I've listened to some of your, watched some of your videos, yeah, and I've seen that, it's amazing what you've been able to accomplish with muscle tension dysphonia, and also spasmodic dysphonia, right? I believe you suffer from. And I think a great exercise there, I don't use this a lot, but vocal fry, and moving between vocal fry and a clear tone, and do a little bit of vocal fry. What that does is it kind of just slackens the vocal folds a little bit and helps us to kind of release some of that squeezing that we have. And again, we have to take a look at our breath, right? Because if we're pushing too much, that's going to keep these vocal folds pressing. And so sometimes if we just back off a little bit, and just kind of keep those lower ribs expanded, you don't necessarily have to use a full-on appoggio kind of approach, but just keeping a little bit of this helps to, again, kind of pace that outgoing breath and mitigate those subglottal pressures so that we're not having to react here, respond here with a lot of pressing and force. But try the vocal fry and see how you do with that. Greetings from Montenegro. Wow, welcome. Thank you so much, Marie. Is it Marima? Marima. Thank you. Here. Thank you. I will perfect each semitone leading up to the entire octave. Excellent. I can relate because of pop music divas with the darker tone. Excellent. Yeah, WNW. Yeah, it's such a danger, I think. Like, on one hand, it's great that we have so much music available to us. On the other hand, I think that oftentimes the recorded voice is so detrimental to singers because we do tend to want to sound like what's popular right now and what's playing on the radio, what's marketable, and that's just yeah, it's a hard place to be in, because I think we try to mold and shape our voices according to what other people sound like, and it's just, I think in the end the listener really hears through that inauthenticity, and it's potentially injurious. And I think it holds us back in the long run, because we're not finding our true voice, and our true voice is ultimately what's going to probably sell if that's the direction that we're taking. Let's see. I know I'm bugging you, but a whistle tone tips. I can't hit G7, but it sounds very. I can hit G7, I think, but it sounds very airy at times. Yeah, well, that's G7 is pretty impressive. So, when you're up in there, one of the things that I do, and I'm so dry. Wow, this is a long video. So one of the things that I do is I do meows, and it sounds really, really silly. I recorded myself doing this, but to get into whistle tones, I just do this, like, I'm probably not going to go up in whistle voice right now, but meow, meow, meow. And I have that little bit of a cry in there, a little, almost a whimper, but then I just meow, and I go down, so I'm not sitting on that note and trying to, like, make it into something that I think it's supposed to sound like. But yeah, and going into those tones, I don't know, it works for me, and I think the hum also helps because it makes sure everything's kind of set up a little more here rather than pushing from here. Give it a try. See if that works. Alina, let's see, is there another way of detecting / feeling tongue root tension besides touching below the lower jaw? Yeah, sometimes we're not aware of it kinesthetically, like we can't feel that sense of tension. I observe tongue root tension can be observed oftentimes in the tongue itself, just sort of up the parts where we can see, where is the tongue narrowing? Is it troughing? Is it retracting? Things like that. And then there are exercises that we can do too. Sticking the tongue out to sing, humming that way, or even sticking it out and gently biting it down on here. I'm not clamping down and squeezing, but I get tongue root tension. I do get tongue root tension, but I also get tension along the whole body of the tongue. And I find when I do that, I feel a little bit of soreness. Not really a soreness, but almost like when somebody's like starts to massage you. You're not necessarily sore, but you feel that working of that muscle. That's what I feel when I bite down. And then I can actually phonate like this. I don't want to stick my tongue out too far forward because that could yank up on the hyoid bone and thus the larynx. But it's basically a hum. But feeling that too, and what that does is sometimes releases that tension, but it will also cue you to the fact that there is tension. And definitely, watching this, this space here, right? These suprahyoid muscles. When we're seeing the muscles go down, we're seeing like a big. It's not going to go down unless you have like a turkey neck. But seeing this kind of pushing down as we're singing, that's a sign that there's definitely some tension at the base or the root of the tongue. So just watch for those things. I have eternal dilemmas with breath support. Expand an area of solar plexus. What to do with lower abs while singing. How to know when you've taken too much air. So many questions about breath. I know. It's honestly it's so fundamental to our singing. It's all about the breath in so many ways, but at the same time, I think sometimes we want to overthink it, want to over manipulate. I do have a number of videos on this channel about breath management that maybe I think will help give you a little bit more of an understanding of how I go about teaching this concept of breath management. But let's see, the solar plexus expand. See, again, I don't think you have to think too much about expanding the solar plexus area per se, unless you feel that tightness. And one of the things that we can do for those of us who do tend to get a really tight solar plexus, a locking, is as we're singing higher notes, just do like a little bit of it's kind of hard to see it from the angle that I'm at, but a little bit of a popping out as we sing high notes. It can be effective, or just keeping our fingers there and keeping a gentle outward pressure against it. We're not pushing the fingers in, a slight outward pressure. But we have to be very careful with that too, that we're not pushing out, because that creates a whole new set of tensions that we don't want to add to it. But honestly, I think oftentimes when we're doing those semi-occlusions, that really teaches our bodies what to do. It teaches our bodies how to use that air more effectively, how much air we need. And I would check out those videos just for the sake of time. I don't want to get too much deeper into this today, but let me know if you have questions when you watch those videos. Just leave them in the comment section or email me. I'll be happy to help you with that. Let's see, YouTubeless house. That's a fun one. I have been dealing with a break issue, studied breath support and breath pressure, lightening up pressure. Maybe it's a vocal tract tension issue, but I can't find the specifics enough to change it. Again, I think if we go back to some of these humming, semi-occluded sounds, I think what you'll find is that some of that unevenness starts to work itself out. The other thing that I think largely gets neglected when it comes to register breaks is the vowel resonance. Vowel is the resonance. How we're shaping our vocal tracts, what vowels are we using, and also the big thing I think too is carrying up too much vocal weight. When we want to make that shift into the upper mechanism of the voice, if we hear this sound that's becoming increasingly strident, getting louder and louder and louder and louder, that's a good sign that there's just too much weight, and that's causing more and more pressure to build up, and it becomes really difficult to sort of come back from that. Let's see. Yeah, and it could be a tension thing too. I mean, especially if you're having tension up here, you're going to be pressing a lot more, and then that's going to really have an impact on your breath as well. Nick, I started applying diaphragmatic breathing 4 weeks ago and started training my vocals with Gum all those sounds, those fun sounds. Is it fine to train the vocals 2 hours a day for the first month? I think it really depends on where you're starting from, and it depends on exactly what kind of singing you're doing. Um, it might, I think 2 hours is probably a lot for somebody who's just kind of starting out. I would say a 2 hour, especially, I mean, especially if it's all in one session, I would say I would go for a much shorter session and maybe a few times during the day. But yeah, I think it depends on what kind of singing you're doing and how robust your instrument is to begin with, and how strong and healthy it is, because we all start from different places. Some singers who experience a lot of tensions and strain and what have you, 2 hours would just be out of the question for them. They need much shorter practices, 10, 15 minutes at a time, maybe a couple times a day, but sometimes just that short session once a day. Very directed, very guided learning, very intelligent in terms of their approach to it. So I would just pay attention to your voice as well. If your voice is feeling like it's tired, it will tell you. It will tell you if it's too much. Mark, you're very welcome. And I should probably let my children out of the basement, and my husband too. Oh gosh, there's still more questions. I'm so sorry if I don't get to these questions here. I think we're going to do some speed answering here. All right. Da, 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 da. Hi, I'm a bass singer, and having thoroughly worked on mixed voice coordination, I'm currently working on achieving an open throat. What are your views on the mechanism? Could you advise some exercises? So, I mean, open throat, I guess it depends on how we define open throat. And are you singing classically, right? Because the open throat for classical singing is shaped differently, right? With a lower larynx, wider pharynx, higher soft palate than it is in contemporary commercial styles of music. So an open throat in my books is basically the sense of spaciousness, the feeling of non-constriction. So we can have, especially if we're carrying like chest voice up really high, like M1 really high, there is a narrowing that happens in the pharyngeal space, and the larynx does go up. But is that accompanied by a feeling of tight, closed kind of tightness or closedness? If it is, then that's problematic. Then we need to go back to the inhale posture and doing some of those, maybe even those dark mum, 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 ba, ba, ba kind of sounds. That's a good way of getting some spaciousness. If we're careful that as we move higher on the scale, we're not modifying that vowel to a ba, ba, ba instead of ba, 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 ba. That's really important. Those mum, 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 mum. Right, that also allows the vowel to turn over, even though I'm not using a lot of vocal effort to really create a full voice, we'll say. But yeah, I think, yeah, the open throat, such a hard thing, because I don't want to advise you in a low larynx approach per se if you're singing in pop, for example. How do you implement I can't read either. How do you implement a healthy style of belting, both lower and upper range? Oh, that's such a good question. I honestly, I am not a strong natural belter. I am still trying to figure out what works effectively for my voice, because as I stated earlier, I started approaching belting from pure open voice, just that yell. And heck, I can yell up into, A5 just fine in full M1 chest voice. I don't love the sound of it. I have no control over it. I can't get vibrato out of that because I'm really locked in that kind of coordination. It feels fine. It feels perfectly efficient. So I personally have been approaching belting in recent months, in the last 6-7 months, from a little bit more of a closed voice kind of approach, which it's really more than I can get into here, but not allowing the vowel to splat and not locking myself in that yell coordination. Yeah, I will record a video on this topic at some point in the near future, the difference between open and closed, because I know it's a really confusing thing, and I don't want to confuse you today. I was wondering if you could give some exercises for keeping a steady airflow. Thank you. You rock. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Again, semi-occlusion does anything that kind of keeps a stability here in the vocal tract. The straw exercises are absolutely fantastic for this, because you can't push through those sounds very easily. You can't push too much air because there's that back pressure that's kind of countering that a little bit. So any of those kinds of exercises, semi-occlusions, the without the break in there. All right, let's move along, guys. Can you explain or even demonstrate how the primo and secondo passaggio for the male? Well, I'm not a male, so it's a little bit different for me to demonstrate. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by demonstrate that. I'd say give me more detail, but I think we might have to say this for another time. I watch you from Hungary. Oh, hi, Aaron. Thank you so much, Aaron Pulse. Thank you so much for joining us today. An amateur singer, 23, and you're a big inspiration. Oh, thank you so much. It's cold. Yeah, you know, we've had a seasonably warm fall here. It's been in the 70s. Like up 2 days ago, 72 degrees, 20 something in Celsius. But now finally the temperatures are getting cooler. Just can't decide what it wants to do here. Choirs split each voice type in two based on whether they have a stronger or lower or higher voice range and cracking points. When I said tenor, oh, 1, 2. Okay, I'm seeing it as half, but I know what you're talking about now. Tenor 1, 2. I meant tenor 1 and 2. Sorry for not clarifying. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Excellent. Oh gosh, every time I move this. Yeah, I mean, I don't. You said I think between choir and classical, right? I think I kind of answered that question already. If not, we can maybe talk about it some more out of after this. I'll have to finish watching later. Love these vids. Oh, thank you so much, WNW. Jean, this has been a great session. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for that lovely compliment. We will be wrapping up soon. Marina Diaz, thank you so much. Following you the whole summer. Your channel's amazing, inspirational, and scientific. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jose, you're an excellent teacher. Just show more exercise and practice. I know, I realize that sometimes I really get caught up in the theoretical. Part of it is just kind of who I am, that I found that just theoretical actually helped me so much in understanding my voice and how to make it work. The practical is hard, partly because I can give you exercises, but there's always that, I feel a sense of professional responsibility in doing so, because I don't know for certain sometimes the exercises that I would give my students, if they're necessarily appropriate to be giving to a broader audience with whom I'm not working on like one-on-one. And so sometimes I kind of hold off on that. Sometimes it's just because I just want to disseminate information. I want you guys to just sort of understand the nerdy aspects of singing. But yeah, I do try to get some practical stuff in there for you, and maybe I need to kind of find a better balance there. Glad to be able to catch you live. This is from Bareebs. Do you have any tips for tweaking our vowels to make sure they're accurate? Apparently I need glasses too. When you do these closed vowel series practice. Yeah, we have to make sure, the big thing here is that we have to make sure that we're actually singing the vowel that we think we're singing, and that comes again to, down to vowel definition. Making sure when we're singing an we're singing an as in but or luck. Making sure that when we're singing an o, it sounds like boat. That's really important, because oftentimes I think we're hindered going through the passaggio area because we're unwittingly modifying our vowels, and that is actually, those vowels that we're modifying to aren't necessarily the most compatible with the pitch, or they're creating adjustments, physiological adjustments that are not working with the pitches that we're singing mechanistically, physiologically. So again, I always say, go back to speech, go back to learning pure vowels, in the sense that, we're not diphthongizing the vowels when they're not supposed to be, that we're getting both the warmth, the outer edges of the vowel, and that focused ring to those vowels. I think those are really important. I'm going to record videos on this topic, on vowel modification, the passaggio, open voice versus closed voice, because it's just way too much for me to get into right now. Oh, goodness. Okay, what exercises? Okay. Alexander, thanks for joining us. I'm all right. My nerves are kind of gone now, so that's really good. Why are you ignoring me? Am I ignoring you? Did I miss a question? I apologize if I did. SDRA America, in terms of the lateral expansion, is this inward and outward? Do you simply inhale and let the air inward hold your expansion, or do you let the side abdominal wall do it outward? That's an interesting question. Um, I feel a sense of almost pulling outward, I think, from those intercostal muscles, just kind of pulling those ribs out. Because I think if we go inward, what we're doing is we're kind of pushing out instead of just sort of allowing those lower ribs to which the diaphragm attaches to kind of just help to slow that diaphragm's rise. But yeah, I'm always very cautious about this feeling of sort of like pushing outward, because that can create a lot of intra-abdominal pressure that can be not very helpful. So I don't know if that really answers your question. If not, I'll try to answer it some other time. Thank you so much for your professional reply. Oh, you're most welcome. Oh, you're in Italy, in Rome. Beautiful. I want to get to Rome someday. I would love to get to Italy. I have not really traveled much of the world. Thank you again for this amazing session. Oh, thank you. Patience. Yes. Anne Marie Jensen. Hi, Anne Marie. So nice to see you. Hi, Karyn. I'm learning straight tone for the first time as a choral singer, singing with no vibrato. I sound awful. Any tips? Sometimes straight tone singing initially, when you're first singing that way, it can be created with a little bit too much tension, because the vibrato is there to kind of offset some of that tension and to prevent things from kind of getting rigid and locked. So it could just be that you need to find a different balance with your breath pressure and what's happening here, because straight tone singing is challenging for some singers. It's easy for me because I sung straight tone all my life. Allowing vibrato and finding that was actually more challenging for me, because I had to increase my vocal effort. In your case, you're probably having to, decrease your vocal effort to be able to get a straighter tone that sounds better and it feels better. S.H. Chan, I hope you do these live sessions more. Well, now that I've somewhat figured it out, I say I figured it out, but actually my husband did. We were up until quite late last night trying to figure it out. In the last minute, we actually had to change services because it wasn't working very well. So I will definitely do this more often, more often than the once that I've done it so far. And I'm going to try to switch up the days a little bit here and there, because I know some of you are all the way across the world and this time doesn't necessarily work well for you. But I will try my best to do this more often. So much easier to understand than 3-4. Yeah, I know my articles are really long. So I do plan to at some point update all those articles and just kind of précis them a little bit and kind of make them a little bit more, a little shorter. I get long-winded. I'm such a detail-oriented person, and that works well in some things and not in others. And I know not everybody has the patience to sit through my ridiculously long articles. Let's see. Last question, I promise. All right, 17 years old. How much would the male voice change after some stronger cartilage forms around the larynx? Well, really, even though you may physiologically continue to grow until up to about 21, your voice is still going to mature for the next couple decades. And women really, our voices kind of mature more in our 30s, even though puberty's long past, long gone. And males, oftentimes their voices don't really start maturing until late 20s. That time even later, depending on the voice type. If it's a dramatic voice, those voices tend to mature even later, 30s, 40s, even in some cases. So it's kind of a tough question to answer, because your voice probably will not settle into what it's really going to be for some years yet. But yeah, just be patient and just kind of go with the flow, because your voice is going to change. I've experienced changes, going through the decades and stuff. I've noticed there are things slightly different about my voice, some things for the better, and some things, I feel like I have to work harder at because of my age. But yeah, just be flexible, be willing to take a different approach with your training, revisit it sometimes. All right, guys, it's so long. Okay, let's see. I'm preparing for singing performance and I got into an accident. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that. Fell off the stage in chorus. Oh no. So now I need to sing from a wheelchair. Oh no. Any tips on how to sing from a seated position? Well, this is what I would suggest for you. There are wedges available, seat wedges, that a lot of choir singers use. That what they'll do is they'll lift up your butt a little bit more and then allow your thighs to kind of be at a different angle. So instead of being at, let's say, 90 degrees, you'll be like this, and that will open up this area of your body so that you're not so kind of compressed. And that will enable you to support a little bit more effectively. That will help. Yeah, I would get the wedge. The wedge is really, really great for that. Let's see. I don't sound as strong while seated. No, I don't either. I don't either for sure. But if I find when I'm sitting like a stool, like a high stool, and I'm able to kind of open up that part of my body, it's so much easier to support and to just feel much more open. But yeah, good posture. Obviously, good posture is like key, because if you're kind of like slumped like I am right now because I'm sitting cross-legged on my fluffy couch, that's going to be even much harder because this is all so shortened, and that just puts your muscles in a kind of in a different place or relationship. But try the wedge. Try the wedge. I think it'd be really useful for you. Good luck with your performance. I don't sound as strong. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, Anne Marie, you're so welcome. And oodles of noodles. I'm able to project my voice and fill a room, but am unclear how to sing softly. So you're probably just using a lot of vocal weight. And if you're singing, are you trying to sing softly in like a chest voice coordination, like M1, or are you trying to sing softly in head voice and you can't access head voice? That's a really good question. I think I'd need that clarification. Does singing softly require you to modify your technique and support? Yes, absolutely. When you're singing softly, you're not using as much pressure up here, as much compression, and then you have to lower your breath support. Yeah, I mean, it's there's that dynamic relationship, right, between this and the resonance, and we have to just make sure that we're making flexible adjustments for pitch. It could be that you're just over compressing and then you're having to use a lot of breath pressure. I don't know without hearing you sing, so it's really hard to answer. All right, I think I'm going to take this last set of questions now that I'm down to the bottom. Softly in chest voice. Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's kind of a matter of sort of easing off, I think, slowly to that point where you sort of start to kind of wobble and everything feels really unstable, and then kind of just find that point at which you can't back off anymore. And over time, you'll be able to back off a little bit more and a little bit more. But lowering those breath pressures, keeping some expansion here, I think will help. But that does take a little these nuanced adjustments. It's a little bit of work for sure. Let's see. Reads. How do you usually go about approaching teaching students who tend to get into over-researching and reading more than they actually play around and practice? Oh, you're speaking to me. That's so funny. Well, part of my job is researching, but I am definitely somebody who I love to I just absorb knowledge, and I could just eat knowledge all day long. It would sustain me. It's tough because oftentimes they get to the point where they are almost paralyzed. They have that analysis paralysis, and they're just they don't know how to move forward because they're so overwhelmed with all of the information. And I think sometimes in that case, what we do is we just go back to things like the primitive sounds, and we go back to just those the sounds that we just sort of make intuitively, the yawns and the laughter and the things like that just kind of get them out of overthinking things and sort of building, and even just building their voice, their singing voice on speech principles and on speech technique, and going from there. Because again, now they're not thinking singing and I have to do this and that and that, and they're not over analyzing everything that they're doing. But it's really hard. It's really hard as somebody who does tend to think a lot to turn that off and to stop over analyzing everything. But yeah, we can get really paralyzed with that, and we just have to be really careful. You're super generous, and thank you so much for your time. Oh, you're welcome. Kara, you're welcome. Oodles, I already answered that one. All right. I'm going to take SDR America's last question or comment, and then we're going to call it a day. This has been great, guys. I thank you so much for joining me. This has been really, really great. It's much longer than I was planning originally, about twice as long, but it has been a lot of fun. I'm really happy to be connecting with all of you guys, and we will definitely do this more often, and we'll keep them shorter. So if I'm doing this more often, hopefully we'll be able to keep it down to that 30-45-minute mark, which I was aiming for today. But thank you for your response. I probably wasn't clear. I feel like I can hold the expansion with the air breathing in versus the muscles of actively pulling. Oh, I'm sorry. hold the expansion with the air. As in, like when the air is in there, it just kind of holds it when I breathe in versus using the muscles to actively pull the muscles away without breathing in. Oh, I mean, are you like, can you do that without inhaling? Like I can see how I can do that even while I'm talking. Is that what you're saying? You're not able to kind of coordinate those muscles to do the job of expanding kind of voluntarily? Not sure. But Reeves, you're most welcome. Yeah. All right. So I am going to call it a day, feed my family, release my children from the basement, get them off that Wii U, and I will post that new video tomorrow in which I will show you my old singing. I'm so embarrassed. So, all right. Thank you so very much, and we'll catch up with each other soon. All right. I gotta figure out how to stop this thing. All right. Bye now.